Hi and welcome back. I've had another request from somebody in my Patreon group for more monochromatic paintings. So I'm going to be painting a sort of semi-abstract landscape here with beautiful trees and maybe a lake, something like that. I'm using Millford cotton paper. It's cold pressed, it's taped to my board, and my board's at an angle of about 45 degrees so that gravity will help me to paint. I'm using a large bamboo flat or haki brush from AliExpress. I'm afraid I don't have the link. It's unbranded as far as I know. But if you go to AliExpress, you'll probably be able to find something similar. I've just wet the sky area down to the horizon completely and left some dry patches of paper across the foreground. It's hard to see really, but that's what I've done. And now this is tube consistency Paynes grey. I'm trying to build up a sort of bank of trees, or the impression of a bank of trees across the back, coming about 2/3 of the way across mostly, keeping them nice and strong, using the tips of the brush and the corner of the brush to get in some slightly larger marks. Keeping those lines either horizontal to across the horizon line, and then using the corner of the brush to sort of dot in the shapes of trees and things. You can see that I've introduced some heavier paint there, so I've got some nice variation in those trees as they begin to diffuse. And now I'm sweeping the brush in a shallow diagonal to give me some perspective across the land, and just letting the paint flow across where the paper is wet and it's resisted by the dry paper. And then a quick few sweeps across the wet paper across the top will give me a very pale wet in wet sky. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to let that run, turning the board round 90 degrees, and any very wet areas in my foreground will now run horizontally. And I can put in some extra paint and get some really rich paint onto my brush and put some extra paint across my foreground, and it will still diffuse and it will soften, and it will give me some nice sort of impression of some maybe hedgerows or something right up close. You can see the white areas in my landscape that sort of resembling a river or a lake or something like that. And that's just created by not painting the paper, leaving the paper dry as well. And the paint kind of forms around it where the paper was wet. I can make any small adjustments that I want to, just kind of blending out some of the sort of larger bits of paint here and there, pulling up some marks just for some slightly higher tree canopies, a couple here and there, just making minor adjustments. And apart from the fact that I want to paint a landscape with trees in it and do it all just with one colour, Paynes grey, there's no other plan. I'm flexible. As I paint, I seize any opportunities that I see. I enhance anything that I really like and change things that I'm less keen on. And that's the way that I really enjoy to paint like this. It's a great exercise in loosening up, and it can be really good practice to sort of learn about the way paint behaves wet in wet. It can also be a great way to warm yourself up if you've got a particular painting in mind that you want to paint from a photograph, or from sort of plein air sketches, that sort of thing. You can do something like this and it just really gets you in the mood for painting something a little bit more planned and serious. I'm using the corner of a plastic store card just to etch through the rich paint there and to create the shapes of tree trunks and tree branches coming up through those canopies, keeping it very loose and very simple. As I say, these sorts of experiments, I highly recommend them. You can do them with any single colour that you like, and just let your imagination take you wherever you want with it. You know, the possibilities for this sort of thing are only really limited by your imagination. I think I'm just about ready to leave it all to dry now. I like the way it looks. I think it almost looks finished already, but I'm just going to put a bit more rich, heavy paint across the tape along the very bottom, just to sort of frame off the painting a little bit better. And I shall now leave it to dry completely, then come back and finish it off with a couple of foreground trees. It's completely dry, and it's dried back a little bit lighter, as watercolour always does, but I really like it. I think there's some interesting marks and contrasts. I especially like the tree line across the back. So I've decided that to finish the painting off, here on the right, I'm going to use my small Chinese calligraphy brush and very rich Paynes grey. And I'm going to fairly carefully, but trying to still keep it very loose, paint in a few trees, larger ones that will sort of cover, they'll come up quite high into the painting and just balance the composition out a little bit more. So I'm flicking the brush off towards the end of the brush stroke to create thinner branches. Also trying to keep the branches sort of fairly angular. And I want to sort of crisscross them a bit as well. I don't want to put too many in, but I just want enough to make this tree look a bit more detailed and a bit more convincing against the very loose background that I've already painted. This tree will be my focal point, which should hopefully lead into the rest of the painting. There's no hurry when you paint a tree like this. It's worth taking your time and just thinking as you put each kind of few branches in, is thinking, am I making it too symmetrical? Does it look sort of like natural enough? Do I need to add another tree? Which is what I'm doing here, just to close off the composition on the right hand side. And I'm going to pull branches from this tree across the tape, so that when I remove the tape, it will look as if the branches are going out of the frame. And I'll bring some branches through across into this sort of further across into the painting, and have a few just bending down quite low to sort of draw the eye across the base of the painting too. I'm going to put a few leaves on, not too much, as this is turned out to be a sort of winter painting in my mind anyway. So I just want a few remnants or remains of leaves just sort of clinging onto the ends of some of the branches. And you can see how I've used the tips of the Harkey brush and more strong Paynes grey just to really quickly and subtly bed in those trees into the landscape, just using those kind of almost stippled marks of rich paint and the tips of the brush. Then back to my calligraphy brush, and now I'm just going to dot and dash in a few leaves here and there, maybe extend a few twigs and things like that, and just work across the tree, putting a few in here and there. Just enough so that it sort of balances up the composition and doesn't look too uneven. And then once I've got enough of those little leaves on here and there, then I'll soften those areas back a little bit and then add a little bit of darker paint and shadow into the softened, blended areas. And for that, I'll use my small squirrel mop. It's just damp, so I'm pushing the paint around, not everywhere. I'm still leaving some of the little dots and leaves as hard edges, but these soft edges just softens things out and gives this loose impression of those sort of old dead twigs and leaves and things on the ends of the branches. And just a tiny bit of very rich paint dotted here and there for shadow. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to pull off the tape and see how it looks. As I tear off the tape, I'm making sure that I remove, pull it away from the painting, because I don't want to run the risk of tearing into the painting if the tape has stuck a bit hard. Some papers do actually tear quite easily, so be quite careful. You probably will have noticed that I double taped this one, as my masking tape this time is sort of not quite as tacky as it sometimes is, and if I use a lot of water the tape sort of peels up, so I taped it down sort of with a double layer this time. So here's the finished painting, and I think it looks quite effective. I really like the way this foreground little group of trees really stands out as a focal point, but then leads the eye across to the very similar but softer trees in the background. And the kind of landscape, it could be a lake, it could be a stream, it could just be snow, it could be whatever you want it to be, however you want to interpret it, that's what it could be. And that's the beauty and the fun of loose painting. Well, I hope you'll have a go at some similar sort of exercises. It'll help you to loosen up and help you to really become confident with the different ways that paint and water react when you're painting wet in wet. Well, thanks so much for watching. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thank you so much to my lovely Patreon group who support this channel. And I'll see you again soon. And happy painting. Bye.